Jenny, as we said, we're going to be talking Nike.
We are talking Nike, and instead of taking Kevin Hanks' usual approach where he talks about shoes, I would like to talk about some of their other digital platforms, because I have the Nike Apple Watch, there's the Nike Running Club, there's all these different apps that Nike is doing a really good job monetizing, and it seems like that's kind of the unforgotten part of Nike. And I was reading a really interesting article about the ways they're becoming more DTC. I thought that was really interesting, and Andy, I was curious if you see that at all in your data.
Yeah, 100%. You know, what we see with Nike, and, you know, at LikeFolio, when we're talking about Nike purchase intent mentions, we're really talking about just English-speaking customers. So there's a lot of people that we're not capturing on the international side of the business. But on the domestic side, we see things actually fairly flat. I mean, there's really not a huge increase for Nike on a year-over-year basis. But what we're seeing, the stock price is moving up. Margins continue to look better and better because they're direct-to-consumer play. And they're also doing a much better job. You know, they've had some stock buybacks, which also pushes the stock price higher. But they've done a really good job. And Jenny, you're kind of the target market of going after the women's side of the business. They're kind of the mirror image of Lululemon in a lot of ways. And so you can see this in their shoes. You know, they've rolled out Jordans for women, which are actually flying off the shelves. And some of those digital products in health and wellness, you know, sports bras, things like that, are doing very, very well. So Nike doing a good job of capturing more of and enlarging their target market.
Andy, you mentioned that you're primarily analyzing, you know, U.S. English-speaking customers through Twitter. To me, if they're able to maintain their foothold that they have on that marketplace, that's got to be massive, because Nike is, you know, how much more room is there to grow here in the U.S.? A lot of their growth story is international, as you mentioned, but if they're able to maintain the market share they already have, that's got to be, you know, massive for Nike going forward as well.
Yeah, it's an enormous deal, and especially if they're able to get more revenue per customer. And so when you think about what LikeFolio tracks, is just people talking about, you know, being a customer of Nike. It doesn't necessarily give us a great amount of insight into how much money they're spending. And when you look at the quarterly conference calls, you know, what Nike's saying is that same-store sales up 6%. A lot of this is due to the fact that they're able to charge more and more for the goods that they sell. Again, very similar to Lululemon in terms of their domestic strategy, going direct to consumer and expanding pricing and expanding margins.
Another thing I saw on social media today is just the brand loyalty. I mean, we haven't even mentioned the partnerships Nike has, the way they kind of have, it seems like we mentioned this a few weeks ago, they've outperformed Under Armour with their partnerships. People love to talk about Nike. People love to obviously compare them to Lululemon, Under Armour, Foot Locker. Adidas was a big one I actually saw today. So our first tweet is from Jeff Mackey, who says, Nike after the bell, shares at the top of the range. Maybe it's true what I hear about Nike. Nike got old, the kids like Adidas. Nike was soft on EPS last quarter for the first time in 5 years. Options are pricing in 5%. No one believes support at $80. So I thought this was funny because I was actually wearing Adidas today, and I was sitting next to Alex Hinks, who was wearing Nike. So it seems like it's still split a little bit in our office, but I mean, you have to consider Adidas must be stealing market share from Nike. I mean, they must be, right?
Yeah, I think they probably are. You know, there's a lot more competitors, and that's what happens a little bit when you start to go direct to consumer. The people have to be coming to you. I think for me, one of the kind of interesting things I'll be looking at in this conference call, and a lot of people will be looking at, is that online e-commerce sales channel. I think it was up 35% year over year in the last quarterly call. So there's big expectations going into that. I think probably Nike's doing a very good job. It's going to have some pin action effects on some of the retailers out there. And, you know, so that's one to watch. That's a stat that I think everybody will have their eye on.
Andy, I know you also have some information on Foot Locker. I believe we've showed that chart as well in terms of the consumer purchase intent mentions there. I know it's roughly what 2/3 of the product mix at Foot Locker is Nike. So seeing some declining purchase intent mentions at Foot Locker, combining that with pretty flat, you know, purchase intent mentions at Nike, is that a move away from Foot Locker to buying those products on that e-commerce direct-to-consumer channel?
Absolutely. I think that could be the biggest story out of Nike's earnings call, could be the pin action that it has on companies like Foot Locker. Like you said, they're very dependent on what they're selling in terms of Nike products, and Nike's instead bypassing them and doing a very effective job of it. And so the more and more you see Nike's e-commerce as a larger mix of its total revenues, the worse that is for Foot Locker. And you can see that in our data. You can see that in Foot Locker's share price. It's something that I think we should all be cognizant about. When we look at these companies reporting earnings, it's not just the company reporting earnings that's going to be affected. And I think Foot Locker's kind of on the brink here. And another big report on e-commerce from Nike could be really crushing as we go into the holiday shopping season.
You mentioned exactly what I was just going to say. It doesn't ever seem like when Nike reports, they're the only one that moves. They have kind of these followers like a Foot Locker, like a Lululemon, that will also move in line with them. So our next tweet says, fresh and clean support and resistance areas to make a trading plan off of the Nike earnings coming out after hours tomorrow. Also watching Under Armour, Adidas, as they will move in sympathy to any Nike moves. So if you actually look at this chart this tweet was referring to, it's a 90-day, 15-minute, and you see these areas of resistance around 88 and these areas of support around 86. So Alex, I'm curious what this could possibly tell you for these competitors or Nike going into earnings.
Well, we can tie this into the first tweet that we saw too. We are at the top end of a range. We're talking about concerns overseas in terms of the U.S.-China trade relations.
Right.
We know that they have so much of their revenue over on the Asian portion as well. Andy's data is strong, but not jumping off the screen bullish in terms of the U.S. situation. But the big key that Andy brought up earlier is by shifting to this e-commerce, this really is a benefit to their margins, and that's the story that really is going to determine where this stock goes from what I'm seeing right now. Andy, I don't know if you have any other insight on that.
Yeah, I think that's really the story. For me, it's looking at how do their margins look? How does their mix look in terms of e-commerce and direct-to-consumer sales? How does that impact competitors? But more importantly, I think, is how does it impact the sales channels that they have established with third-party retailers like the Foot Lockers, like Dick's Sporting Goods, and so on. That could be where more of the action lies from a 3 to 6 month type of time frame than on Nike's stock itself, which is, as we see, pretty stable. It's a giant in the industry, but it does affect a lot of other companies in a big way, like Jenny mentioned.
Just to wrap it up then, you really like kind of the second and third order effects of what Nike's done with their business, how that impacts the Foot Lockers, the Dick's Sporting Goods, as you said. With Nike, though, your data, as you said, is only going to be looking at a portion of the story. Do you guys look at this as maybe a wait-and-see reaction and then make a decision after that, or do you have any type of a feel on Nike in particular going into this?
Yeah, unfortunately, pretty neutral on Nike itself going into this. I think, you want to see the data, you want to see the mix. Our data says their consumer is fairly strong, but nothing crazy is going on. And so it seems like more of the same type of quarter. Holiday sales will be the key. So we get, 2 months out from now, I think our data will have a nice lead for Nike sales and revenues. But right now, we think things look pretty much in line.